Russia mobilized, and they are annexing 4 more oblasts from Ukraine. In this video, I want to talk about Putin's speech and what it means. A lot is happening. Putin has declared what he calls partial mobilization, which apparently means that they are calling in 300,000 people from the military reserves. Many people have asked very justified questions about whether Russia even has the capability to handle that many new soldiers. Do they have the equipment, the resources for training, and so forth? And also, people have pointed out that this doesn't actually solve Russia's many other problems in the war. Perhaps it can alleviate some of the lack of infantry soldiers, but it's not going to give them air superiority or fix their command and control problems or give them back that artillery strength that they had before Ukraine got HIMARS. And also, if your logistical system is already running at 100% and it's struggling to deliver supplies to the soldiers you have, then adding more soldiers on the front line is basically just going to make that problem worse. And if the soldiers on the front line won't have the supplies that they need, then maybe they might as well not be there. All these are very relevant points, but I think that we should perhaps also not be too quick to sort of disregard the ability of the Russians to do something meaningful here. I mean, even if they're only capable of getting maybe 100,000 soldiers, then that's still a significant number. So let's wait and see what they can do, and then I guess we will soon get a good indication of what Russia's mobilization potential really is. But I do have a couple of other points. The first one is, why is this happening? Why now? Back in the beginning of May, I made a video about Putin's options if he wanted to end the war, where I said that he was probably not going to do mobilization. I think it was the right analysis at the time, but time went on and stuff happened, or maybe it didn't happen because Putin didn't actually go with any of the options that I listed. He just let the war continue, and the result was that Russia got into a situation where things are worse. So as a result of that inaction, Putin's options changed. But I still think the premise of the analysis is right. I made this figure to illustrate the options, and the basic idea is that there are some things that are more important to Putin than winning in Ukraine. And the most important thing is to stay in power in Russia. That comes above everything else. And the factor that I mentioned to be the most decisive for that was the ability for Putin to control the public narrative about the war in Russia. Last week, I made a video about how Putin was about to lose that control over the public narrative to the ultranationalists and the military blockers. And that was a result of the failure against Ukraine's counteroffensive in Kharkiv. A few days after I made that video, the military bloggers suddenly stopped criticizing Putin. Like, something clearly happened that made them change their mind. So they stopped criticizing Putin for not doing enough to win in Ukraine and for abandoning the soldiers, and they stopped calling for mobilization. I guess we now know what happened. Like, somebody reached out to them and told them this was going to happen, and now they support the president again. But the point was that the way the war has turned out, the dynamics in the figure have changed. If Putin wanted to keep the control over the narrative and to keep the power in Russia, he now had to go for mobilization. So that is why this is happening. And the reason Putin has waited so long was that he was afraid of the reaction from the public, that they won't support the mobilization and that there can come an anti-war movement. But it had come to a point where he was more afraid of the ultranationalists, because if he did not do mobilization, then that could also engage the public against him. So it's a kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't sort of thing, but the more immediate risk was the military blockers, and Putin chose to give in to their demands. That leads to my second point. I have heard a lot of people saying that this mobilization shows that Russia is preparing for a long war. I don't think that is necessarily true. I think this mobilization and the annexation of the occupied territories is Putin's attempt to end the war quickly. That it can function sort of like the American surge in Iraq, where they increase the number of forces for a period of time to sort of get things under control. Because the way Putin can regain control over the narrative in Russia is if this ends quickly. If it drags out, then Putin will face problems from both sides. The military bloggers will criticize him for failing to transform the mobilization into gains on the battlefield, and they will start saying that this partial mobilization was not enough and that Russia needs full mobilization. So Putin will basically get the same kind of criticism from the ultranationalists that he just put a lid on. And from the other side, there will be a growing anti-war movement in the population, because many of those Russians that are now being mobilized are going to die or get wounded. So Putin needs the war to end quickly. And I think he hopes the annexation and the mobilization and the nuclear threats will work as a sort of fait accompli. And that then leads to my third point, which is that even after this mobilization, there is still a mismatch between Russia's ambitions and their capabilities. So it's actually pretty obvious that Putin is not going to get a quick win. If the plan had been to use this mobilization to stop Ukraine's counteroffensive and then to fight a defensive fight in some areas, then it could perhaps have had some sense of realism. But that's not what Putin is saying. He is talking about Russia going on the offensive and taking more land. In fact, he's not only talking about Donbass anymore, but about the liberation of all Russian territory, which I guess now supposedly also means Zaporizhia and Kherson oblasts. If Russia wanted to make their war in Ukraine sustainable, what they should have done was to do the mobilization and then to also reduce the goals. But that's not what they're doing. What they're doing is that they are mobilizing and then they are also increasing the goals. So there will still be a mismatch. And that leads to my final point, which is that I think we should be prepared for a lot of talk about nuclear weapons in the coming time, both from Russia, because they want to intimidate, but also from the West, because they want to emphasize the deterrence. Like, literally, the worst thing Joe Biden could do right now would be to go out and say that the risk of nuclear escalation is low, because that would give Putin the idea that the West is unprepared for such a situation and that perhaps there could be an opening for a surprise attack. So what Biden needs to do is the opposite. He needs to increase awareness of the nuclear threat and send some very clear messages that the United States is going to respond if this happens. So I think we're going to hear a lot of talk about nuclear weapons, and some people will get scared. But this is what is called brinkmanship, that you bring the situation to the brink of war and you hope that your adversary stands down. So it's really sort of kind of chicken game. But there's really no alternative to playing this game. Like, Ukraine or the West is not going to let Russia win just because Putin says some crazy things about nuclear weapons. And Russia is coming to this from a position of weakness. But I do think nuclear weapons is going to be something that we will talk about a lot. Okay, that was my initial thoughts about Putin's speech and Russia's mobilization. If you found it useful, don't forget to press the like button, and also don't forget that you can subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon to get notifications when I upload a new video. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again next time.